So good evening. I'm Ariel Gerstein. As Pat said, I'm Charleston County Sustainability Manager. Thank you for joining us tonight for our first climate action planning webinar. Developing a climate action plan for the county is really important because it's going to give us a roadmap for the future to track our success in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We'll be able to better understand how to prioritize projects based on impact. I'm now going to turn it over to Naomi from Sustainability Solutions Group, who's our consultant for this project, to kick off the webinar.
Thanks very much, Ariel, and thanks very much to the Sierra Club. Can I just say, even though I'm in Victoria, British Columbia on the west coast of Canada, I already would like to join your group. So it looks like you plan some very fantastic events. And I'm sorry that I'm going to miss out on the potluck. Hello, everyone. So as Ariel mentioned, my name is Naomi Devine, and I'm a member owner of Sustainability Solutions Group, or SSG for short. And I'm the project lead on this project. And I have some excellent team members with me who I'd love for them to introduce themselves as well as our partners and subcontractors, Civics. So I'm going to begin with the SSG team, and then I'm going to go to Civics. So Camilla and then Amber, would you like to introduce yourselves to everyone?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Camilla Melrose. I'm joining you from the opposite side of Canada to Naomi. I'm located in Nova Scotia, and I am the senior analyst on this project with my team and with Civics.
Thanks, Camilla. Let's go to Amber, and then we'll go to Jared.
Hi, I'm Amber Nickel, and I'm in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I'm the lead modeler on this project. That's it.
Fantastic. And Jared.
Hey everyone, my name is Jared Genova with Civics. I would normally be talking to you from New Orleans, Louisiana, but today I'm in Baltimore, Maryland, and I'm helping to lead the team that's focused on implementation planning and connecting our climate actions to ways that the city and partners can make this a reality.
Fantastic. So just to give you a bit of information about us, SSG's been, we've got about 35 members, and we've been doing this for about 20 years. And I, to be honest with you, can't believe I can say that I've been climate action planning for about 15, essentially of those. And our approach is we have project managers and process designers to engineers and graphic designers. We work with wonderful other companies like Civics as well to essentially innovate. And we've done over 100 climate action projects across North America, or most of them, and now we've expanded into South America recently as well. So we're very pleased to be working in Charleston County and to meet you all. So during the webinar, we've just got a few things that we've learned over moving everything very interactive. One of the benefits too to being a remote company, even before the pandemic, was learning how to put these processes into place and be successful at them. So if we could ask you to stay on mute when not responding to reduce background noise. Sorry, I've got some this evening, so I'll work to reduce that myself. At any time, please open the chat and ask your question. We have a team of people here who can answer those questions, often live. We will have points in the presentation too to stop and have questions. And then we're going to have some interaction this evening with Mentimeter, and I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. We want to balance airtime to hear from as many voices as possible. And we want to be curious and challenge our own assumptions and biases. Climate change is a really hot topic, if you will. I'm terrible with puns, but we know it's something that folks are passionate about. We want to hear, and we want to hear from everybody. And also sort of, in that sort of challenging our assumptions and biases allows us to maybe learn some new things along the way as well. You will have gotten a notice when you signed in that this meeting is being recorded, and it'll be placed on the project website, which we will also place in the chat for you as well this evening. And it'll be made available to anybody, and Ariel is also going to email it out to folks as well. So instructions for Menti. So I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to put a direct link to Mentimeter in the chat for me. Or what you can do is go right to menti.com in a browser. So open a separate browser from Zoom and type in the code 51750032. So I'm going to switch over so that these instructions are right up on the screen for you. So there they are. The instructions should essentially be in the chat. I'm just going to call the chat up myself. Camilla's put the link in there for me as well. So that'll just get you right into Mentimeter. And if you can give us a thumbs up or let us know in the chat when you're in there, we'll just ask the first test question. I can see I got 6 people in there, so hopefully we can get a few more. And what we're going to want you to do is stay in there. So once you're in Mentimeter, please stay in there for the presentation, because we'll have some more questions to ask you at different points along the way. And in a moment, Camilla, if you can put the link in again. Thanks, Tracy. Just as new people arrive, we want to welcome you into Mentimeter as well to make sure we get your feedback. If you do have trouble, we can submit answers for you. So Ariel is able to do that. So you can also just put your answers in the chat and we'll essentially get them there for you. Can you hear me better now, Kathy? Hopefully that sounds a bit better. Can everyone else hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me okay? All right, fantastic. Okay, all right, let's go with the first question here. So bring this over in Mentimeter. How much does a female polar bear weigh, do you think? We've got a few answers in Mentimeter there for you. I'm going to show you how this fun tool works. So bear with me. There we go. So we've got a few answers in here already. So it's working for people. We've got 8 people in. Hopefully we get a few more in there. If anyone's having trouble getting into Mentimeter, please let us know and we'll be able to help you out. And Camilla's just placed the direct link in there again. Fantastic. Look at that. 10 people. Great. All right, looks like it's working for everybody. So that's really good. So I'm going to move on in a moment just to the next question. So it'll be a real question. The answer to is the first one, between 350 and 650 pounds. That's how much a female polar bear can weigh. But let us know. So we'll start to see your answers live. You should now have a box. It should move automatically to give you a box to put in a word. You can put in one word, and then I've set it up so you can do more than one submission. So you just do one word at a time. And we'll start to get a word cloud will start to appear. Yeah, concerned. Very understandable. So yeah, I've seen concerned and afraid, some panic, yeah, sad, disgusted, anxious, yeah, frustrated, hot. Definitely. I can relate to those things myself. We've got the biggest fire in British Columbia's history sort of burning right now, and it might even burn into the winter time. So certainly there's a lot of motivation, I would say, to act on this. Yeah, worried. We'll give this a few more seconds here. Let us know if you're having any trouble, but thank you very much for your participation. Yeah, immediate, hurry. Yeah. We see concerned being the biggest one there, daunted. We have some good news for you tonight, though, too, about this as well. All right, 10 more seconds. Feel free to add more words if you'd like. Crisis, yeah. Let's see, worried, extinction, yeah. All right. Thanks very much, everyone, for participating in that. I'll leave that open right now for you. So it'll be open in the background. Please stay in Mentimeter. Don't exit out of it. As I mentioned, we will come back. And so I'm going to go back to the presentation and dive back in. Oh, it's just 1 second. It's just showing the wrong one there. Okay. So the agenda, we've done the welcome and introductions. We're going to spend the bulk of the discussion on climate action planning. So what does that actually take a look at or look like, and the engagement process? So additional events that we would love for you to participate in, to bring yourself and your friends and your neighbors as well in the county. And we'll talk about what next steps take a look at this evening, or look like this evening. So over to Camilla to talk about her favorite topics, adaptation and mitigation.
Sure. So when we think about climate action, we can broadly think about it in 2 different ways. The first, and one that we probably hear the most about, is mitigation, which is about reducing the amount of greenhouse gases or carbon dioxide that we're emitting into the atmosphere, or even removing it from the atmosphere. And the second is adaptation, which is where we want to try and change our built environment and our cities and our lives so that we can handle the changes that are inevitable with climate change. So we can think of adaptation as managing the unavoidable and mitigation as avoiding the unmanageable. So these two fields work together to try and reduce the level of climate change, but then also make sure that we're prepared for the levels in changes that we're already going to see because of current conditions. And I will go into a little bit more about the types of actions that we can do for that. So before we get into that, we have a Menti question for you about what we can do to prepare for the impacts of climate change.
And it's now open, so you should be able to answer. Now you should have a box that you can write whatever it is you like in there. What do you think we can do to prepare for the impacts of climate change? And feel free to answer both from the mitigation or the adaptation side of things.
And there really are no right or wrong answers to this because it is such a diverse field and will require action from everybody in every sector in every part of their life. So there are really no wrong answers. So I'm curious to see what comes up.
All right. Yeah, stopping driving, switching the ways we get around, switching up transportation, definitely. Plant trees and put solar panels on my roof. Yeah. Yeah, decreasing dependency on fuel, trying to save the rainforests, reducing meat consumption. Yeah, decide what we value. Yeah, values-based conversations in climate tend to be very more successful. Develop clean energy and transportation. Yeah, decreasing fossil fuel consumption overall, definitely. Increase critical line setbacks and scale them with elevation to avoid future landowner conflicts with sea level rise. Yeah. Stop buying so much. Yep. All things that are parts of the solutions. Raising infrastructure. Fantastic. Find help and a place to retreat to. Educate and elevate women. Fantastic. And if you need the link to Mentimeter again, please let me know. Okay, can't see the box. That's okay, Kathy. If you want to type your answer into the chat, we can include it that way as well. So no problem. Go green. Yeah, raising infrastructure. Certainly must feel that as a coastal county. Well, I definitely feel that here. I live on the West Coast and on the coast as well. Yeah, local food production and permaculture. Fantastic. Yes, and Amber says too, you might have to hit next question. It should advance you, but just in case it doesn't, you can hit next question. It'll take you to where we currently are. All right. Working with nature. Somehow get politics into agreement, understanding more about the impacts, and yeah, financial incentivization. These are all really fantastic. So thank you very much for them, and native planting and rewilding. So I'll keep that open in the background for you as well. We'll just go quickly back to the presentation. Thanks, everyone. These are fantastic answers. All right, back to Camilla.
Yeah, so a lot of the things that you were suggesting are the sorts of things that we include in the modeling and the planning that we do. So when it comes to adaptation, wait. No, yes, okay, sorry, I got confused. When it comes to adaptation, some of the biggest hazards that we see are the extreme heat, increase in flooding, either from sea level rise or from storms and precipitation. So the sorts of things that we can do are to make sure that our homes and our buildings are energy efficient and that we have space heating and space cooling available for everyone. We can invest in green infrastructure, which is instead of using pipes and culverts and what we call gray infrastructure to move our stormwater, we use green infrastructure made of plants and the natural absorbency of the earth to help to filter and absorb rainwater and stormwater in big storm events. We can ensure that the remaining storm infrastructure can handle the increased water volumes from the less predictable and probably larger storms. Some of you mentioned planting heat or drought tolerant plants, and also being prepared for emergency events to ensure that the entire community can be safe and protected. when it comes to mitigation, this is where we really focus on some changes about the type of energy that we're using and how we use it. So one of the big things that we can do is eliminate fossil fuels from our homes, from our vehicles, and from industry. There were some comments about reducing how much we were driving, but there's also the thought about switching to non-fossil fuel derived fuel sources. Along with that, we can clean the electricity grid and expand our use of renewable energy. We can improve the energy efficiency of our buildings or our homes and our businesses through insulation and swapping out for efficient heating and cooling systems that rely on clean electricity and not fossil fuels. And we can reduce the amount of organic waste heading to landfills to try and get better control over the methane emissions that come from the decomposition of that organic waste.
Thanks very much, Camilla. That's great. I see you've got questions coming in the chat. That's great. We'll try and answer them, but there's also time. We'll have Q&A time too, so I'll come back to them as well. So in terms of a climate action plan, or starting with climate action planning, what does the 101 look like? A climate action plan gives us clear pathways of action over time. And so essentially, it helps us sort of understand the big picture and the size of the challenge essentially that we're facing and where we would like to go together. The plans are helpful to have because they align with federal and state requirements. And often then when there's programs that the federal government or state governments often issue, one of the first things that they look for is a climate action plan already in place as well. So it helps qualify for those too. It gives us metrics to monitor and adjust and to justify investment that will need to take place in order to move certain actions forward. And also it will help set reevaluation timeframes because this is a multi-decadal process. So if we set a target out to 2050, for example, once the plan is adopted, it would be about moving forward and taking action from now to the future. So any plan of that length would require, of course, continual review and making adjustments as you go along. So this is not a one and done or sort of set in stone. It's a starting point is probably a better way of looking at it. It's important to the county too that we have an equitable transition to sustainability and planning processes like that. Make sure that those factors get taken into account and put into the plan. And we want to maximize what are known as co-benefits. It's a very terribly technical term, but it's the additional benefits, the other good things that happen when we take climate action as well. And that's certainly part of our process as well. We'll be talking about that together too. And we want to, of course, minimize the negative impacts that are associated with the changing climate that Camilla has mentioned. So this diagram shows that there's multiple stops along the way when you're creating a climate action plan, or it's an iterative process, which means that, again, it's not really one and done itself. There's different stops along the way. So we begin with things like data collection and what we call model calibration. And we're going to show you a draft calibration of the baseline year, which is 2020, sort of tonight. But we're still in that phase where the initial modeling is being done with the data essentially that we've collected. And in terms of engagement, we've done something called pre-engagement, where we've spoken to people to give us a sense of how should we set up a good engagement plan to engage people in Charleston County as well, to make sure everyone's included who would like to be included in the discussion. Then active engagement sort of begins tonight, and it's going to extend for a while. This plan's timeline, takes us until spring of next year as well. And so we've designed an engagement plan, and I'll talk a little later about the specific engagement opportunities that exist. And we're doing things like a context review as well, reviewing all the plans that are kind of currently in place. One of the first things that we will do in terms of model projections is what's known as a BAU, or business as usual, and BAP, business as planned projection. So what that means is we're taking a look at the emissions and we're taking into account things that are already happening and taking a look at what emissions will look like out till 2050, if that's all we were to do, if we were to just do no more and not, do a low carbon climate action and adaptation plan. And so that gives us a sense of the size of the challenge. So that's something that's going to come next. And then we do scenario modeling. So we'll do a low carbon scenario is what will get modeled after that. And then we take a look at the health and financial and economic analysis, co-benefits, as well as I mentioned, sort of happen there. And then we draft a plan and we get feedback on that. And then we have the final plan. And we would sort of present that to the county council, and the county council ultimately decide, of course, to adopt the plan. at the end of the process. So that's sort of a high level look at a climate action planning process itself. There's a lot of stops along the way, lots of different factors, lots of feedback that gets taken into consideration at each stage. The planning hierarchy or framework for planning, though, like an easier way to talk about it is that if you look at this from left to right, this helps us sort of think about how it is that we want to plan to reduce emissions. The best thing we can do is just avoid emitting in the first place. So that's like the first stop, right? Avoiding the activities that generate emissions or require energy. That's not, of course, possible for everything, you know what I mean, that we do. We understand that. And so the next sort of thing to consider is how can we reduce? How do we reduce the energy, of course, that we need to use by using less, and we want to avoid wasted energy. Then we take a look at if we can't do that, or we get to the limits of that, replacing. So how do we switch to renewable energy sources, for example? And then it's about removal. So how do we use natural systems or technology to sequester greenhouse gases, natural systems like sequestration, for example. So that would come down to there's things like tree planting or blue carbon, you know, sort of making sure that we maintain the natural resources that we have so that they can also help us with this. And then with what's left is the option is offsetting. So investing in emissions reduction initiatives to decrease their costs and address local emissions that cannot be eliminated, essentially for a lower cost. Let's take a closer look now at like the Charleston County, though, CAP process. So this climate action plan, like why should we do one for Charleston County? So it's going to demonstrate leadership in the challenge to, of course, reduce emissions, which is a really important thing. And we understand, of course, the city has a plan, you know, too. So it's great to have the county have one as well. It helps us anticipate and manage climate related risks. It ensures infrastructure is resilient to climate change. And in this particular process, we want to have an interim target for 2035. And then, for example, we need to have another target like net zero by 2050 that's suggested, but we'll be talking about targets in this process as well. So, and why now? You know, essentially, it's the decisions that we make today do have lasting impacts well sort of into the future. So, for example, if we're looking at, if we had the okay to replace all vehicles in Charleston County today with emissions-free vehicles, the lifespan of existing vehicles or ICE, like internal combustion engine ones, is still about 10 to 18 years. So it becomes a while before those phase out and people start to replace them on a regular cycle. Or when we're building something like a landfill, this is just an example, it has a lifespan of 40 to 50 years. So if we want to do that differently, we need to understand those types of timelines, you know, as well. There is a clear global consensus that there's no time to waste in taking action on climate change. And the consequences of inaction, of not taking action, it's not a case of if you don't take action, there's no impact. It's the impacts will be more severe. We'll have things like more frequent and intense heat waves, droughts, floods, as well as the rising sea levels and a widespread loss of biodiversity. And this, of course, will impact freshwater availability and quality, stormwater volumes, infrastructure, invasive pests, crop viability, and there's more, you know, consequences. So acting now is going to help us much more. It's going to be much more beneficial than any type of delay. Another way of looking at it here too is that if we take a look at now in 2020, you see to the right of that line, you see future emissions scenarios, potentials. If we're still emitting very high, it's really getting quite red and quite hot by 2100. And even before that, you know, sort of course, to very low. So even if we were to stop, you know, if we were to, even with low carbon interventions today, there is still a warming effect that we are going to essentially experience. And that's why the adaptation measures that Camilla was talking about earlier become really important. So even in the very low emissions scenario going forward, which would require a lot of global action, global and local action around the world, is that we're still going to face a warming world for quite some time to come. That's no reason not to delay. I like to think of it as much more urgency around making sure that we act. So you can see too, somebody born in 1980, they're going to be 70 years old in 2050, where most of these targets are sort of set to with the climate planning process that's happening sort of in many places around the world. And so it's still going to be a quite warm world for that person when they're 70 years old. And someone born in 2020, it's going to be much warmer for them when they're 70 in 2090. So we'd like to make sure we intervene as soon as possible and get on the low emissions track. Just to give you a big picture of emission sources in the United States, self-transportation is a big one. Electricity generation as well, depends on the source of how the electricity is actually getting generated, of course. So it's different from region to region. Industry at 24%, we've got agriculture at 11%, and commercial and residential roughly the same. And then waste would be a category that you don't see on here that would be coming from things like industry, agricultural, commercial, and residential. you see the types of greenhouse gas emissions as of 2020 in the United States across the top. And methane is one of those sneaky ones. Camilla, I don't know if you want to give an example, sort of on this, but just because it's 11%, methane is quite potent though. And so even though you see carbon dioxide is a bigger aggregate amount, methane is one that sort of one to worry about. You don't want to see that number increasing. We definitely want to see that number essentially decreasing. Is there anything that you'd want to add to that, Camilla?
No, nitrous oxide is also another one where we do have a number of different greenhouse gases that as part of our analysis, we convert into carbon dioxide equivalents or CO2 equivalents. And that's because different greenhouse gases have a different global warming potential. So they are more or less active in the atmosphere in comparison with a carbon dioxide. So we convert them all into carbon dioxide just to make the math a little bit easier for all of us. But when we're talking about GHGs or even CO2 equivalents, we are talking about all the full suite of greenhouse gases, not just carbon dioxide.
Yeah, thank you for that. So you'll see things when we reported in carbon dioxide equivalent, which is taking all of these into account, as Camilla mentions. What does it mean really to be net zero? You'll hear that target a lot with respect to climate action planning. And so if you think about it, it's that the line in that bathtub, it can't go up. And ideally it goes down, kind of thing too over time. But really what we're talking about right now is we can only emit as much greenhouse gas as we are able to absorb or sequester. And of course, we're doing more than that right now. So that's why low carb, I like to call climate action plans like low carbon interventions is one way to think about them too. But we really don't want the water level in that tub, in the analogy to rise, essentially. I also like to think about climate action planning like this. So if anyone remembers sort of the daringness of Evel Knievel, your target helps set the speed at which you're going to act and sort of understanding the speed with which you would need, essentially to act. And modeling helps give us a pathway essentially for us to consider in order to meet those types of targets. So climate action planning is really about what are we going to do and why sort of behind it. Implementation strategy, and you heard Jared mention that, who will be working with us on that, is about the how, the specifics, and we're going to be engaging on this as well to make sure that, again, the implementation pathway is as localized and appropriate to Charleston County as the size of the challenge, essentially, that we face as well. And so it's as big or long as how many things are essentially happening on the other side of that. So we want to make sure that that target is set right, and the modeling is as accurate as possible in order to bridge the gap, here and land on the other side. Currently, we have IRA funding, so Inflation Reduction Act funding. That's federal government funding at the moment. Wanting to have that climate action plan in place because funding opportunities will continue to become available. And essentially, you want to make sure, again, that Charleston County is well positioned to take advantage of those. Geopolitical context influences this as well. We can have a really good model, but we couldn't model or know that the war in Ukraine was going to happen and the effect it was going to happen on energy prices when it did. And future events like this, of course, will certainly take place as we move towards 2050, right? But then good things are happening too. We're about to hit a tipping point for EV adoption in the United States with about 5%, sort of adoption. And that's happened in the last year, as well. So things can move in multiple directions as we move into implementation as well. Program design partnerships are also important in that, and things like non-modeled actions. There's often a lot of actions that communities and folks want to take that aren't part of the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions that that our plan will heavily focus on. And then there's scope 3 emissions, essentially related to things like the purchases that you make, as well, like things that are generally outside of the jurisdiction of the local government, but still important and still a factor, essentially, in the discussion itself. So just giving you a picture there of how both climate action planning and then implementation strategy kind of work together to get us where we need to go. So Charleston County is already, of course, taking some action as well. So just a bit of a quick look at what's happening from a governance perspective. They have climate resolution. We have Ariel, who's doing a fantastic job as a sustainability manager for the county. And she's produced a GHG or greenhouse gas inventory. In terms of buildings, there's a variety of things going on. There's solar power on a county building, the detention center. There's LEED Silver certification at the Consolidated 911 and Emergency Operations Center. there's applications for different building certifications essentially going on for different facilities that the county has. And there's a Charleston County Energy Conservation Program that right now tracks energy and water usage for 71 buildings in the Energy Star Portfolio Manager. It's really important to measure things, right? What is measured is often what gets managed. And the county hosted a homeowner energy conservation workshop in April 2022. And certainly, education and awareness raising is an important part of the mix in all of this. In terms of waste, there's a single-use plastic ordinance, composting programs for residences and businesses in the McGilbee's Ferry Compost Facility, a recycling program, and staff programs for e-waste and batteries. In terms of transport, there's 6 public EV chargers, and there's a grant in order to put some more in. And there's 2 electric vehicles in the motor pool for the county right now. And the Greenbelt program is funded by is funded to conserve 30% of county land grants as green space as well. So Ariel, is there anything else you'd want to add to what I've said? Or did I get it? Did I get it all?
Yeah, I think you covered it. Thank you.
Oh, no, great. So it's good to know that the context review is going the way that we would like. So let's go back into Mentimeter. I'm just going to advance the question here for you, then I'll call it up on the screen. So do you have any burning ideas for ways that we can decrease emissions in Charleston County? And I will switch over, so we'll take a look at your answers live. Oops, back to the presentation, pardon me. There we go. All right. Solar or parking garages, nice. And if you need to jump in Mentimeter, I just see we've got 2 people in there. Let's get everyone back in. Camilla, if you can put the link back in, that would be fantastic. Fun, wonderful, thank you. So if you just want to do 1 click right there, you'll get right back into Mentimeter where we are. Tidal wave power generation. Yeah, preserving and restoring wetlands to sequester. Workable public transportation, gas capture at landfill. Fantastic ideas. Yeah, solar on everything. Phasing EVs into the fleet. Great. Increasing the number of EV charging stations, working with local providers. I have to say these are fantastic answers. We don't always get answers like this when we start processes, so this is really wonderful. Investing in infrastructure to split the mode share, only investing a fraction right now. Yep. Decreasing sprawl. Yeah, land use is a very powerful lever for greenhouse gas emissions. And similar to that slide I was showing earlier, which is decisions we make now. So land use decisions that have been made in the past very much shape, what we see today. And so decisions, of course, that we make today are going to have an impact on the future. Thank you very much, Kathy. Electric train into Charleston. And Ariel, if you can grab that and put that into Mentimeter, that would be fantastic. All of the answers that you put in Mentimeter too are great because we capture them and we get to keep them and work with them moving forward. Yeah, rideshare, getting rid of lawns. Nice. Yeah. Improving community transportation, green space, and marshland. Yeah. Can we encourage decrease of beef and milk consumption? That's a good question. Yeah. Decreasing rural land use conversion from timber to residential. Fantastic. Yep, the electric train got in there. That's great. Limiting mowing, change any public services from gas to battery, creating walkable and livable communities. That's great. And there's so many of those co-benefits I was talking about earlier to things like walkable, right, and livable communities. Enforcing green building codes. Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, I'll leave that question open in the background in case you want to give more answers to this question while we carry on with the presentation. All right. Okay. So yeah, you already have a sense of what some potential climate actions will look like, and we're talking about at scale. So the size of the challenge is going to be big. And so we're going to need to look at things like increasing renewable energy at scale, right? Improving building energy efficiency and deep retrofits of existing building stock as well. Transition to emissions-free vehicles and emissions-free transit, and making active transportation easier for people to choose, as a way to get around. And making sure it's available for people with all different types of ages at different ages and different abilities, right? fuel switching around heating being such a big source of what happens, of course, in buildings. We want to maintain and protect current infrastructure, and of course, reducing water consumption. So that's just a quick sort of preview of where action sort of planning discussion will be going. And from all the answers you've given already, it sounds like you're well primed for that. We'll eventually create like this fancy diagram that you see here called a wedge diagram. Have you seen one of them before? Let me know in the chat, if you have, or feel free to give me a thumbs up in the reactions in Zoom. So essentially, this is just an example sort of pathway. The reference scenario in yellow across the top there that you see would be what would happen if there wasn't like a big, sort of intervention. The wedges or colors sort of below that are the slice or size of how many emissions need to be reduced for each different action itself. So if you take them all together, each action results in greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And the gray area underneath is the carbon budget, or how much carbon is being emitted. And so as we head to the right, and usually the time frame on the right at the end is 2050, you see that the total actions sort of taken together get us close to the target, and then we still have that bit more to reduce to get to net zero, essentially, in the future. Again, we're at the end of the day, like the bathtub analogy, we're not emitting more than we can absorb, essentially. And so that's the breakdown of what a decarbonization pathway or a low carbon pathway essentially looks like. What this also is supposed to stress, or the takeaway, is that we also can't really pick and choose actions. It's about implementing all these actions as a package. If you don't implement one of these, then the where we end up at the end goes up, and so the remaining emissions would be higher, and that doesn't put us in a very feasible, sort of position for the climate in the future. So that's the important thing too, is that climate action planning is a package of actions that need to be implemented together. This is a look at a particular community's wedge that we did recently, just to also give you a sense of what this looks like in action. So this is not at all Charleston County, as we're not here yet. We will get here eventually. But essentially you see where they were on the far left, essentially just in 2018 was their baseline year. And so they had a reductions in emissions for electricity. There was some switching that went on in the grid. And then they had some fuel switching that took place or will take place at their university, which is a major player and employer in that particular town, from coal to natural gas. And then you see where they've got to go. So big part of the answer for them is the renewable energy generation. Then we see building retrofits program is the second biggest slice. And then as we go down, reducing vehicle emissions, increasing active transportation and transit use, reducing waste emissions. So just spit out order, it's building retrofits, then net zero new construction, reducing vehicle emissions, increasing active transportation and transit use, and reducing waste emissions. And so collectively, all of those wedges of actions, and there's more specifics as you go into the plan as to how they do each of these. There's an overall 94% reduction from 2021 that needs to happen for them to hit their target. And you can see 2030, it's quite a steep descent where they need to get to in 2030. And it's better to act quicker and more aggressively sooner, to get to your target than to sort of wait and try to do things more drastically, essentially near the end as well. So let's take a look at the draft baseline year emissions for Charleston County in 2020. And Camilla, did you want to walk us through those?
Sure. I just
Fantastic.
moved the presentation so I could look at my version of the presentation. Okay, so this is just a snapshot of where emissions are coming from, subdivided by the type of fuel. And so I know Ariel has done an inventory that summarizes the same information, but we have to start from scratch and make sure that everything that we're putting into the model aligns with what Ariel has done. And so this is our translation of that information through our model. So when we look at the emissions, we can see that imported electricity, which is electricity that comes from sources not within the county, so like the grids of electricity. It's the largest single source of GHG emissions. Electricity is generated about 50% through nuclear, and then a combination of natural gas, coal, and a bit of renewable. So we are seeing the majority of those emissions coming from the natural gas and the coal. We also see that if we combine diesel and gasoline, that transportation is ultimately the most emissions heavy sector So that means that when we're planning our actions and figuring out how to reduce our GHG emissions, we want to focus on the transportation sector in particular. I'm going to draw your eye just to one other one that might not immediately make sense, and that is the non-energy emissions. And those are a combination of emissions that are coming from landfill, so organic matter that is decomposing in landfills and releasing methane, as well as fugitive emissions from natural gas pipelines. So if you were wondering about that one, that's what that is. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I'm just gonna, it's not advancing, but I'll advance just a second here. There you go.
Okay. And this is the same information, just subdivided slightly differently. So we're looking at it by sector. And so you can see that transportation really does swamp the rest of the sectors when it comes to emissions. And that's going to be really helpful when we start thinking about how to change that pathway. When we look at buildings, which is often another really important sector, we can see that residential and ICI, or industrial, commercial, and institutional buildings, are responsible for 2,100 kilotons of CO2. So it's not an insignificant amount of CO2 coming from how we exist and heat and work in our homes and our businesses.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Camilla. Thanks very much, Amber, for working on this too, for getting this done for us. And we say it's draft, so it's a very first, sort of look. It'll get more precise as we go along in our modeling process. And the next stop is to produce the BAU, or business as usual, emissions from the baseline year out to 2050. I'm taking a look, and the BAP, so business as planned, are the next projections. So this will get refined. This baseline year information will also get refined, but you wouldn't find like transportation to all of a sudden become insignificant, or if it did, that would be quite a surprise. I think Amber probably would agree with me, or Camilla would agree with me, sort of on that as well. And this, of course, tracks with the general emissions in the United States. I was showing you on an earlier slide is that transportation and buildings do tend to be a very big slice of the emissions pie, so to speak.
Naomi, there's a really good question from Ronald in the chat that I think is very relevant. So I'm just going to point you towards it, or I can read it out.
Yeah, thank you. So what about the carbon footprint of manufactured goods, building materials, and agricultural goods brought here from outside the county? So that would be what's considered scope 3 emissions. And so we use something called the GPC, and I am the global. Can you fill in GPC for me? I've just said it so many times, I'm blanking on what it actually stands for.
Global Protocol on Climate Change.
Thank you, on climate change, right? So essentially they tell us how to divide up where emissions sort of come from, themselves. And so what you're talking about is essentially what's in scope 3. And so what we'll do is we'll get you a link to actually talk about the different scopes themselves, and we can talk more about it in the Q&A just near the end of the session here to get into that. Mostly our climate action planning process is focused on scope 1 and scope 2, so not the ones that you're talking about. Because these are the ones that the county has more direct control over. But certainly those ones are important, and it's not that they're disregarded, they're handled differently and would need to be handled through a different partnership model, which is certainly something that we could put into the climate action plan, as well as what's the county's role in also helping reduce scope 3 emissions too, because we all have a role to play in those reductions as well. They're just a bit trickier to think about because there's multiple actors in multiple jurisdictions. Yeah, thank you. I know I appreciate you asking the question. I think it's a really important one. So thank you very much for that. All right, over to Jared. We haven't heard from Jared yet.
Hey, everybody. To shift gears a little bit from taking the data and then moving it into what we can do. And Naomi, you mentioned a little bit about what's in control or the purview of the county. And this is really where we get into the nitty-gritty of that. My team in particular is focused on attaching prioritization and funding pathways to each of the actions that come out of this planning process. So by going through all of the different ways that we can reduce those greenhouse gas emissions, and then adding other layers of ways that we can make sure that there is a clear pathway to achieving the goals that come out of this plan. So for implementation planning, really we focus first on prioritization. So that's prioritizing, of course, based on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Feasibility, which is going to be important. That includes the capacity of the county to actually do something about it. And also community capacity, because not all of these actions can only be taken by the county government. Funding opportunities is something we're also focused a lot on, because there's a lot more out there today. So whether it's through the IRA or through different programs that are coming through the federal government, we have a lot of experience working on that kind of side of things with local governments. So we're going to be working really closely with the actions team to make sure that funding opportunities and program designs can get attached to each of those actions. We've also mentioned co-benefits here. So that's another way to screen and for priority for how to act on these things. And then of course, equity impacts. So social equity and how we can really make sure that the actions that are taken can help communities and increase equity across the county. Our last point here is just to reiterate that focusing really clearly on funding pathways and program designs, that's what can really make the actions clearer. The leads and who can support can be made clear. And then ultimately, this can turn into a work plan for the years to come. So that's our goal through this process. But it's going to take knowing how everybody can work together and what all those opportunities are moving forward. So looking forward to getting into that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jared. We're almost through all this information that we're giving you this evening. Thank you very much for your participation. Let's go back into Mentimeter. And we've got one last question for you. Is going to know, what extreme weather events do you remember in your lifetime? What have you noticed that has been changing? And I'll change it up here so we can watch the answers come in live. Hugo, king tides. Yeah, we get those here as well in Victoria. More snow despite warmer winters, big changes in precipitation, rain bombs. Yeah, Hurricane Andrew. Longer droughts. Are there any gardeners in the group noticing different things about growing seasons as well? I wonder about that. More erratic storms. Yeah, Hugo. Sunny day flooding. Earthquakes. Earlier hurricane season. More pests. Can't grow tomatoes. Oh, interesting. And also, oh no, like tomatoes are fantastic. More frequent and intense hurricanes, extreme swings in temperature, shift in planting zones. Yeah, later freezes. Yeah, plant and animal migration patterns due to climate shift. Hotter at night. Yeah, it can make it difficult to sleep if you don't have air conditioning. Sunny day flooding. I'm totally interested in hearing more about that. Ariel, I don't know if you can add to that, but it's okay. We can also discuss it sort of more post-meeting as well. Yeah,
we can talk about that offline. That is that's a Charleston thing.
Okay, great. Good to know. Thank you. Yeah, king tides more frequently. All the wildfires increasing, hurricane strength, increasing winter storms, extreme weather patterns, more 100 or 1,000 year events just in my short life. Yeah. Microbursts. All right, I'm going to leave this open. I'm just going to go back to the presentation, but please keep answering if you'd like to in there. Thank you very much for those. It's very helpful to know for us as well. So project outputs. So that there's going to be a social equity output. The CAP will assess impacts on different communities and groups in Charleston County and how plan implementation will address those social equity considerations. We have a particular engagement opportunity on that we definitely want to see you all and your friends and your neighbors at as well. Benefits framing. So we've talked about co-benefits tonight. That'll be in their implementation evaluation. And Ariel's answered a question about that in the chat as well. We'll assess the costs and benefits of action, and Jared spoke to this too, and the cost of inaction compared with climate action. Partnerships are a really important part of this conversation. Really, once the plan and implementation plan are done, it's up to the county and the community, right, to make it a reality. So we will have a strategy for engaging partners and designing and implementing actions and mechanisms to report on and enhance those partnerships for community benefit and performance progress. So establish a system to track progress over time. And as Ariel mentioned too, there'll be inventory updates every few years too, to see if the county is on track and be able to make changes if not, or continue on with what's working too, and finding that out. And yeah, so we'll be able to track that hopefully as frequently as you would like to be able to. Quickly on the engagement process, I mentioned this too. So at any time, and we can pop this email into the chat as well for you. Ideas are welcome there at the email that we've set up particular for this project. We're going to be having in the fall a workshop on social equity and low carbon action implementation. So once we've had a chance to model the low carbon scenario, we want from that a summary of insights on the social equity inputs for consideration in shaping the CAP, and a list of criteria for how would we prioritize successful low carbon action implementation specific to Charleston County related to this and to social equity. We'll be doing a community mapping workshop to identify community vulnerabilities for adaptation. And we'll be doing a town hall on the modeling results and implementation planning as well. So more opportunity to give us feedback on how to best implement the actions that will be necessary to get us to the targets, the low carbon targets that we need. So those opportunities we really would like to see you at, and again, your friends and your neighbors, so please do, and we'll have the dates coming up for those on the project website as well. Ariel, if you can throw the project website URL in the chat, that would be great. And we can follow up with that via email. And we'll have additional engagement input as well from other members of the community. We have a Resilience and Sustainability Advisory Committee that Ariel has put together and has appointed members from across the community on that. And we've put together a staff expert climate advisory team as well. So both of these groups will be providing SSG with continual advice and assisting in ensuring that our approach is properly localized to Charleston County as well. So just so you know, we're really at the beginning stages of this project timeline. It's going to take us into spring of next year as well. And so we're just sort of starting the active community engagement period now. And got an RSAC meeting actually next week as well too. So it's been really wonderful to get to speak with you all tonight and start to explain this process and also get some initial feedback from yourselves too. That's been most helpful essentially to us. And so we just want to know what questions you have for us before we wrap up. And we have an evaluation for you so you can let us know how we did and how we can maybe improve, future engagements. I'll get that back up for you, and we'll throw that link into the chat for you too. So yeah, what questions do you still have for us now that we've gone through the entire 101 session? And feel free to raise your hand, and you can unmute yourself if you'd like to, or ask in the chat, whichever you prefer.
Naomi, I think there was a question in the beginning about how you weight different parameters in the model.
How we weight different parameters in the model. So setting parameters, I think we're getting into discussion of perhaps assumptions. And I think Star, you had that question, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, there you are. Fantastic. I don't think the stocks and flow model weight things, Amber. Sorry to put you on the spot. I'm just going to talk about assumptions.
No,
instead.
it was directed toward the adaptation side, and Camilla has answered it actually in the chat.
Okay, great. Fantastic. All right. we've got an answer specific to that one. Let me know if you're looking for more though, Star, as well. I'm just taking a look through the chat.
So I'm going to answer the last question. It says, how committed is the County of Charleston leadership to the CAP in light of the rapid pace of new development that appears counterintuitive to the CAP? Yeah, so great question. I mean, I'm not going to speak specifically for the leadership, but I will say that, this is a plan that will need to be approved by our county council, and it's going to go through our new advisory committee. The plan is going to kind of go through them to the council. So the hope is that we can get it to a point where everyone is comfortable and happy with that. And this is very long-term goals. So yeah, I think that it's going to take some education, and we're going to be working on that. We're going to be doing several presentations to the county council through this process to kind of show them what we're doing and why it's important. So if you're interested in supporting the plan, you can show up to county council meeting or do a public comment or something like that. But I think that they've hired the sustainability position. There also is a resilience position. So there is interest in working on these issues.
Thank you very much, Ariel. And question for how to support the process. Coming here tonight is really important. We welcome ideas we've got the email here. And also if you want to sign up to be notified of the future sessions, so they can come the invite can come right to your inbox. We welcome that too. We'll have the dates put up on the project website for you to follow along there as well. I think it's going to be really important to get a lot of people out to the social equity workshop, essentially that we have, the town hall, the community mapping, to understand the vulnerabilities. Yes, that email will be open to the public, and it should be I think it's on the project website already, Ariel, is that right?
It is not, but it will be tomorrow.
Okay.
Yes. I just want to answer their question. Is there any effort to communicate with the municipalities as it's happening? Absolutely. I mean, so the county, as many of you probably know, we have jurisdiction for the unincorporated areas. So it is critical that we work with other municipalities in Charleston. I work closely with the city of Charleston. They're the only other municipality that has a designated sustainability person, and they're actively working on climate action and emission reduction. So that's a pretty easy one. And then for the other municipalities, we are forming like an expert advisory group. Some of the municipalities are participating, and we hope that more will in the future, but we're definitely keeping them informed, and it's up to them the level that they want to participate in terms of their bandwidth. As you know, some of the municipalities in Charleston are quite small, so they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to do fully this work, but we definitely want to collaborate with them where we can.
Great. Thank you very much for that. All right, great. Good to know. Mount Pleasant has had its first Green Commission meeting this week. So that's an opportunity. That's wonderful. Yeah, too.
So the last question is, most of the action being handled by the cities with support of the federal government, anything substantive from the state? So the federal government is doing a grant for climate reduction right now. As far as I know, the state has, South Carolina has applied. And then Charleston is currently not doing it because they're doing it by population, and our MSA is right on the border of being eligible. So if someone else drops out, then we definitely will apply. And it's basically to kind of write a climate action plan, but in the format that the federal government wants, so you can then apply for more implementation money for federal grants. And we're very interested in doing that if we have the opportunity. And if not, then we'll be working closely with the state. DHEC is in charge of the state application. From the state, they are working on an EV, I think, yeah, it's an EV tax incentive that I believe passed the House and is going to be going to the Senate for the next session for next year. So that's what's going on. And the state also has a resiliency office, but I can't really speak to specifically what they're doing in terms of emissions. Greenville is large enough. Did they apply? I'm trying to remember. I believe they did, but don't hold me to that. I believe Columbia did. I can't remember if Greenville did. So, but I think we're in the next spot if someone else drops out. So hopefully we can take advantage of that. I'll let you wrap up, Naomi, since we're going a little bit over.
Oh yeah, no, and thank you for answering those questions too. And thank you for asking them, and really want to say on behalf of SSG and the project team, thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you very much to the Sierra Club for hosting this as well. That's so lovely. Please open up that link to that type form and let us know how we did and what else you'd like to see in the future sessions as well. And we really look forward to seeing you again and working with you on this very important planning process. So take good care, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.
I'm going to sign this off. There'll be a recording posted shortly.
Great. Thank you so much,
Bye.
Star.
Thanks, Dar.